As we mentioned in the previous podcast, the doghouse, the Warren Urin investigated paranormal manifestations from the decade of the 50s. During his long career, he worked in more than 4,000 positions. Cases included the famous case of Admitted, where they were the first researchers who were allowed them entry to the scene of the crime. Many of the cases have become movies for decades. However, the spell is based on one of the most shocking cases in the career of the Sluts. It's about the dog family and the hell that they lived in their great capacity of Harrisville, Rhode Island, known as the haunted house of Harrisville, or the possession of the family. Dog guard them refer to this case with the most intense, complex, disturbing, and certainly the most important that I would have a chance to investigate. But his wife Carolyn, as well as his 5 daughters, were persecuted more than a decade for the spirits and demons who lived in his country house, looking for a new life for his daughters. Don't worry, the dogs bought the house of his dreams in the winter of 1970. The old Arnold property had more than 200 acres of land and had been one of the first plantations in the area. From the time of the first settlers, the first Lovely View construction of 10 rooms was built in 1736 in the middle of a peaceful forest, ideal for them to grow. The dog girls, Nancy Christine, shared a room. Mothers Cindy, Abril, and Andrea. She had one to herself, except in the recurring occasions when their sisters appeared crying with fear to spend the night in the room of his older brother. The dog family noticed something strange since the first day they arrived at their new house. Simcoe would make 8 generations of families had lived, and a lot of dead on the old Arnold farm, including John Arnold's wife, who, at the age of 93, just hanging behind the barn. There were many more deaths on that farm, including suicides by poisoning, hanging, rape, and murder, not resolved to put pressure on us. An 11-year-old girl as well as 2 boys drowned on the near side, and 4 men who froze to death, between many others. Soon the dogs were given it counts because the seller of the house Les advised to leave the lights on during the night. At the beginning, the ghosts seemed harmless, described as opaque, almost solid visions. There were countless appearances of dozens of spirits in the house, to one of them what, accompanied by a smell of flowers. Another kissed to the girls every night when they were about to sleep. Another one of them, he was a little boy whom the girls, they were constantly watching and moving small toy carts all over the room. Manny was another one of the spirits with that the Warren girls got attached. Manning is believed to be the ghost of John Arnold, who had committed suicide at hanging in the attic of the house in the 1700s. Manny always appeared near the girls and even smiled, enjoying their games when they are eye contact with the man, and disappeared. In addition to the ghosts, the dogs witnessed many other paranormal events or inexplicable beds that avoided several inches off the ground, objects that they were moving on their own if they were dragging behind the visitors, and portraits that were continually falling the walls. However, not all the spirits in the house of the dogs were harmless. Some were pulling at the lines by the hair or their legs while they were sleeping. Others were flogging at the door so hard that made the whole house rumble. Had such evil spirits that which they were labeled as demons. among them the spirit of a man who, it is believed, he may have abused the girl's dog, and of course the most evil of everyone is going to Chiva. We will delve more about them in the second part of this podcast. Eddie Lauren Gard are considered the original researchers of the paranormal. For decades helped in cases of haunted places and possessions, demonic across the length and breadth of states. Many of his cases were approved by the Vatican to carry out exorcisms to the demonic entities that they found the dogs knew about. The new guards from one of their presentations and came over to ask for help with Carolina's possession. At that time the family had of course, the spirit of Bacaniva had taken control of the dog lady and Edward, and soon checked it. Andreas, dog, the eldest daughter, remembers the night the exorcism and write the following: "The night I thought I saw my mother dying was the scariest of all. She spoke to me with a voice that never I had heard before, and a power that no is of this world made her float in he threw 8 meters from the next room." Unfortunately, the true story of the dog family ends up very different from the ending we saw in the Conjuring movie. In real life, the Warrens did not success in helping dogs to get rid of the demons that they rode Carolyn, but remember this one night, and explains that although the guard's intentions were good, basically after his participation, things got worse when the demonstrations were completely out of control. Roger Dog demanded the Warrens that they will abandon the investigation. The family but did not know afterwards that all of the previous occupants of the house, with the exception of the minister, religious groups, have reported activity paranormal. The previous child has hired a builder to make renovations in the house. This job normally for a few days until he suddenly left the house and never came back. It is reported that he left the place screaming, leaving behind his tools and his van. The owners never moved into the house, and it remained vacant for several years until that the dogs found the very low price. Despite the unbearable the situation for the dogs' economic difficulties, they were forced to stay there for many years. They had to learn to living with the presence of ghosts, harmless and trying to put up with the evil presences. Finally, in 1980, and at the insistence from Carolyn, the dogs managed to save long enough to leave the house if moved to the state of Georgia. Edward died in 2006. Loren follows, conducting paranormal investigations, and manages the Museum of the Occult in his house in Monroe, Connecticut. The museum it is open to the public, even though requires a reservation and a small entrance fee. Andrea Perro wrote me a book where he tells about the experiences he lived his family, called House Darkness, House of Light. According to Andrea, the current owner of La Casa Norma Soft Click, who purchased in 1983, she reported that she and several visitors have experienced activity paranormal, like slamming doors, voices in other rooms when there's no one else, footsteps running through the house, and a fog that appears randomly in different parts of the place. Various of his visitors claim to have seen an old woman who goes through them in silence. Corridors of the house. Even today, the activity he concentrates on what was the bedroom of Carolyn and the studio that is located just below. Interestingly enough, under the study and the basement there is an old well outside, of service to the water as they recorded many of the events, paranormal, and still wonder if the Pozo has some violent history linked to him, as like most of the doubts remain and will remain unanswered. By the way, the grave of Evasive Sister, it is located in a cemetery, Harris Wild, Rhode Island Historic. Although the tombstone is broken, it is relatively easy to find this grave and is constantly visited by tourists. If anyone wants to follow the steps of the movie, you can visit the Paranormal Museum of the Warrens and even the grave of Evasive, who is open to the public. However, the current dreams of the house that appears in the spell, they ask for privacy and not to be annoyed about it. Next, we will narrate the dedicated episode to the exorcism of Carolyn Dog from the book From Andrew to Casa de Luz, Casa de Darkness. As we mentioned in the previous podcast, the doghouse was also inhabited by several evil spirits, some of whom the Warrens considered demons. There was an entity that constantly woke up the family, avoiding a bomb explosion, while other phenomena approached, not without 8 years, whispering to him the country and its dead soldiers between the walls. One of those whom the Warrens considered demons. The spirits were so evil that the dogs they did not openly discuss their actions in the book House of Darkness, House of Light, written by Andrew de Perot. The greatest of the sisters hint that he may have sexually assaulted girls. When asked about it in an interview, he dodged the question and simply answered, "The reporter, just say that this house with 5 little girls was inhabited by the spirit of a very, very evil man. However, the most diabolical creature of all for Shiva seemed to be focused on chasing Mrs. Perot. It is believed that this creature was the ghost of the practicing Satanist and witch Base Wasserman, who lived in this house in the early 19th century and died after hanging herself from a tree behind the barn. The dogs did not belong to a religious family. It is believed that lack of faith was the main factor in March's extremely violent activities towards the family. This theory is confirmed by the fact that the previous resident of the house, a religious minister, never reported any. Lauren Guarani explains about strange events simply because you have everything you need to know. Your faith to protect you. I've always had faith, and God protects me by doing this. At that time, dogs had no religion, and it was very dangerous for Shivas. He was a slave and a creature who looked terrible, with a face whose skin seemed to be part of a dried up hive, as if covered with cobwebs, and skin covered with wrinkles, in the depths of which human traces were barely discernible. His hair was gray and loose, and his head always hung to one side, as if his neck had been broken. There's a terrible smell in the air. The room was felt by her every presence. La Savada Jr. was born in 1812 in Rhode Island and married Don Herman in March 1844. She led a secluded life away from society after she was accused of sacrificing her baby to Satan. The baby's head was pierced with a sharp object. However, The accusation was rejected due to lack of evidence. It is believed that he had 3 more children, none of whom lived to be 4 years old. His children were not his only victims. He tortured his servants for the most minor reasons. When she died on May 25, 1885, the coroner said he had never seen anything like it, since within a few hours, her body practically changed and became as hard as a stone. The fact that he touched Mr. Perot's neck and back while he was working on something in the basement made it increasingly obvious that this man hated Carolyn. An article in the Providence Journal in 1977 describes the following. Mrs. Perot woke up one day before dawn and saw a ghost at her bedside. The woman who, according to her, was killed. In an old gray dress, with her head hanging to one side, a voice shouted to her from outside, "Get out! I'll get you out with death and darkness." First, Carolyn felt only strong tingling, then tingling in objects that were rushing towards her. The creature soon discovered that Mrs. Pardon was most afraid of fire. The attacks intensified, and one day Carolyn felt severe pain in her leg during examination. Shortly after, the goats finally got hold of Mistress Bitch, and soon Carolyn discovered a long knitting needle stuck in her leg. They turned to Eddie Loren for help. Listen to the conclusion of this story in the 3rd part of our podcast about the spell.